Hi, and welcome to Infosec Pros. I'm Kayne, CISO in residence at Hyperproof, and I'm joined today by Conor Sherman, CISO in residence at Sysdig. Welcome to the show, Conor.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we're shooting this live today at Black Hat 2025. And just to set the stage, we're going to be talking about the role of CISOs, like ourselves, as organizations try to develop enterprise trust and continue to adopt AI. So just as a grounding question for our audience, how do you think of the difference between traditional or normal AI and agentic AI?
Got it. Yeah. So agentic AI, in the context of most security leaders, I would say it really is this ability to have a system, intelligence, take action. So that means it needs to understand the context that it's working in. It needs to have the authorization to go do something, and then it needs the appropriate guardrails, but then ultimately it goes and does something. So the agentic piece of it is the AI, the intelligence, is either expressing action in a system that humans are interacting with, like a Google Drive or a production environment, or in some cases, it's the AIs talking to other AIs, passing along context and insights. So I really separate out generative AI with agentic AI by saying, is there action and activity that's coming out the other side? And if there is, then you're heading towards agentic.
Okay, and just for agentic AI as well, we're starting to see this in web browsers. I think that a couple of the main AI manufacturers or vendors are talking about incorporate or making an AI browser. And I know that Microsoft has recently announced that they're going to put agentic AI into their web browser. So this isn't exactly an esoteric conversation, right? I think we're going to start seeing this at the consumer level as well as at enterprise use. Is that fair?
That is fair. I mean, so we're going to see more of this intelligence, the AI that we're putting out, start to take action on behalf of people. So one of my points of feedback to the industry, and as I have an opportunity to talk with CISOs or with heads of products at the companies you're kind of referencing, is we need to make sure that we don't lose the last 25 years of good browser security that we've been building up, because we solved a lot of problems with process isolation. We've solved a lot of problems by sandboxing certain things. And if we start to take action, one of the things around action is it's interacting with these systems. And to do this, in some of these firewalls, some of these ISO security guardrails we put in over the last 25 years have to come away. And that's kind of scary. And I want to make sure that we find a way to receive the benefits that we're all promised while making sure the guardrails are still integrated. Because by the time it gets to the consumer, they need products that are stable and reliable and, have those safeguards baked in.
All right. And I think also this, just at the tone at the top of security leadership is also changing as a direct result of the incorporation of AI. How do you see the fundamental responsibilities of security leadership changing based on all of this AI incorporation? And do you see any changes to the core competencies of being a CISO these days that we need to either unlearn things or learn new things in order to be effective?
That's a really good question. So in the context of AI inside of an enterprise, right, moving away from the consumer side and over to the B2B side and the consumer, we have historically asked the chief security officer to focus on securing an environment, which really, when you boil it down to, is can we have some sort of confidence, some sort of statistical confidence that our environment is free of an adversary, right? But as we're building in these systems that are going to take action on the behalf of our consumers, even in a B2B or in a B2B2C model, what we're going to find there is people are going to know, is it trustworthy? And this is a fundamentally different take, because trustworthiness is around, is it, and safetiness and the safety of these systems is going to be around how does it perform under its normal conditions, right? So if security is when your environment is free of an adversary, safety is about how is it going to operate in the boundaries of normal conditions when you've got it. And so we're seeing a lot of researchers, we're seeing a lot of red teamers, we're seeing a lot of people kind of push the envelope on what it means to be safe. And so I'm really seeing a lot of security leaders lean into that, right? A lot of CISOs sit at the AI governance level and they're helping enterprises adopt. And they've got the kind of this twofold mandate, which I'll talk about in a second. But that concept of safety is really important when you're talking about bringing in an intelligence to run your business, right? That's really important. And then there's this third pillar that's really important. I say CISOs are kind of at the perfect nexus to help foster this, and that is reliability. Will these systems that we're building be there when we need them most? Will they be present and operating correctly under adversarial situations like business continuity, disaster recovery, and then of course, and continuing forward? So to answer your question, I think the CISO starts to move away if it's not the CISO's day job, at least they're in the room organizing the right set of leaders such that we can really focus on trust as the output. The output of a good system here would be trust. And 3 of those pillars are going to be security, safety, and reliability. And I think the job of the CISO is going to continue to be stretched to cover all 3 of those pillars. And so it's going to be up to the CISO to have the self-awareness to know, where am I great at? Am I great at having the technical expertise to cover all 3 of those? Or am I more of an organizational executive, more of an organizational leader, where I'm going to bring in the department heads who own these as and bring them together? At the end of the day, we need to make sure that all 3 of those are covered, because that's the role of the management team, is to make sure that they're delivering that to they have trust with their consumers, they have trust with their regulators, and they have trust with their partners, right? So I do think the role of the CISO is changing.
Yeah, and I want to kind of poke at that, because you said it's getting spread a little thinner for CISOs, and I think many of us as CISOs have felt spread sort of thin over the past 30 years of having CISOs, or 40 years. I'm sure somebody in the comments will note that we've had CISOs for 4 decades now. The role keeps changing, and I don't know if we've got a good governance model that establishes clear responsibilities for who owns this at the governance layer. Because the way I think of this is it often comes down to a question of business risk.
Yes.
Not technical risk. I'm going to set aside this idea that cybersecurity risk exists, because it does not. You cannot prove to me that it does. Like, if it doesn't have a business impact, nobody cares. So the question that comes to mind then is, as we look at the level of expertise and knowledge that's really required effectively, and especially knowing that right now AI expertise is wide but not very deep. Right?
Yeah.
Do you see any good governance models that are coming up yet that have effectively been able to demonstrably show a reduction in risk or an increase in productivity alternatively? Because I don't think we can just overload everything on the CISO.
Right.
And I also would say I don't think we can throw everything at the poor audit committee, because they're already the kitchen sink committee.
You make a really good point that risk needs to be grounded in the context of the business that you are managing the risk in. If it's not translating into a strategic outcome, a financial model, if it's not having the there, if it's not there, then that's not our job. The job of the security officer is to understand our remit, whatever that context looks like, where those disciplines are going to be. As we noted, they're changing a little bit, making sure that the risks that are associated there, the technical expression of those risks, are then made aware to the management team so they can make effective decisions. And then we as security leaders can show up with risks and options. Here are the risks, here are the options, and here are the costs. So if we take that framing that we are, as a security leadership community, part of an enterprise risk community, like inside the company, and we're an input into the system. We are not the system. We're an input into the system. Then we can start to say, what are the right frameworks that let us understand the risks and implications around the AI component of this too? So one of the characteristics of the security officer, I think, that we see everywhere is adaptability, right? Security officers are people who, by their very nature, are service-oriented. They like to get into the thick of the most difficult challenges most companies have to solve. And then they're service-oriented. So they do tend to be people who are going to have a broad role. They're going to have a broad exposure to the company. And then they're really good, those who are succeeding at this, are at translating what does that mean for the business? What is there? And so when we get into the AI security piece, I think we will see more CISOs having a loud and clear and decisive voice inside the AI governance roles at organizations, simply because they sit at the nexus of a lot of the information flow. They're already talking to the technology and the product teams and the business operating teams, and the IT teams. They're already there and they're already seeing it. And basically AI is being infused in all of these different departments. So if they're in that role, they're going to make sure that the management layer for all those departments is risk informed. They're going to make sure the management team of the company is risk informed. And then they're going to be able to say, here's how we think we should go about managing this risk. And then what are the right technical controls we put in place to stay within our risk tolerance? But all that to say, when it comes to particular frameworks to help us understand the risks of AI, there are kind of 2 parts to that answer. One is they're emerging and it's not here yet.
Right.
And the second answer is, but we've got some really good starts, right? There are frameworks that we can use as executives, such as we can be going on one side where it's the ISO 42001, where that's kind of international standard that's starting to get adopted. We're seeing the NIST AI CSF. That's helpful there. Or you're getting more tactical. You're looking at the OWASP top 10 for LLMs, right? A friend of mine, Sandy Dunn, she helped write the thing, and she's there in the midst of it talking about like what's the real technical risk, the expression of that. Mm-hmm. So I think as security leaders, we're starting to be given tools by our peers with these frameworks that we can analyze. My one word of caution, though, is as a CISO, we have to remember these frameworks are written for us. They're not written for the board. They're not written for the management team.
Right.
So success is not saying we have green check marks across this whole list and turning that report over to your management team, because that doesn't drive any behavior change. It doesn't help talk about the impact to the business, right? So as long as we remember that these frameworks that are emerging are meant for us and the people outside the four walls of the company who want to have like some sense of like, are you tall enough to ride this ride? And we say, yes, here we are. Here's our paperwork. That's great. But then we've got to be on the other side of what you were kind of alluding to. How do we got to take that? We got to distill it down. We've got to help them understand here's what the impact is going to be and work backwards into mitigations.
So you raise an interesting theory there. And I love that you're seeing some of the positive effects of CISOs getting engaged. I run a private CISO roundtable.
Right.
I recently did we've been talking about generative AI and agentic AI now for maybe 18 months, sure, almost 2 years, I'd say. And one of the questions that's come up recently and repeatedly is what the role of the CISO is. And initially, everybody was like, oh no, it's a risk problem. It's not ours. Maybe it's a compliance problem, or maybe it's a contractual issue, like a third-party vendor risk management sort of thing. It's not a CISO thing. And in, what would that be, July of this year, so pretty recently, we did another CISO roundtable and polled the group, and still 4 out of 10 CISOs that I talked to, their job is unchanged. They're not involved in AI conversations. And these are not at small companies. Some of these are at name brand companies that I won't name drop. But it looks like there's a bifurcation happening in the market where there are definitely organizations where the CISO is part of the conversation. Yeah. And then there's organizations where at a governance layer, they're not part of that conversation. What do you see as some of the challenges there for those CISOs who aren't part of that conversation, thinking of how sometimes CISOs can get scapegoated, for example, for not having been involved, or alternatively, the perception of the Department of No, which is why you wouldn't want to have them in a conversation anyway, because they're just going to say, well, AI is whatever, AI is bad, AI is scary, so we can't do that. Do you think that's what's driving this resistance to incorporating CISOs, or do you think there might be some other factors?
Possibly that could be part of it. When I work with CISOs and I work with the executive teams of a lot of organizations, something I'm seeing emerge is that people are on different timetables. Enterprises are on different timetables. So depending on who you talk to and when you talk to them, you'll get different answers, because some financial services enterprises are going to be understandably want to move a little slower. People who are making decisions on people's medical records, they're going to want to move a little slower. Those who are helping us get from point A to point B a little bit faster, they might be more adoptive. So just depending on where that company is at that time, we'll also talk about what is their risk appetite or their tolerance to adopt these AIs. So it could be that some of those CISOs are, as you mentioned, name brand organizations. Those companies might just be moving a little slower than the rest. And some of the other ones might be moving a little faster. So there is no two companies are the same. But what I would also say is that if you take away that horizon topic and just kind of put that to the side for a second, there are these two emerging themes I see with CISOs. I see that the CISOs have this dual mandate. First, for the organizations that are leaning in on AI, they have to, like most executives, rebuild their organization with AI first. And that's a real challenge, because you can't just put an LLM into a workflow and think it's going to happen. You do need to have a sense of like, this is a early intelligence. It's often equated to like the super smart intern. And so if I'm going to rebuild my security operations functions, my detection and response, my vulnerability management, my attack surface management, these are important functions that we can't drop the ball on. So you have a lot of CISOs who are in this spot where they're like, okay, how do I get the leverage? How do I get the cost savings? How do I get the scale and bring in an AI intelligently into these workflows? Now, that's kind of one thing. And that's a lot to tackle, which is like basically rebuild your organization with AI. But they also have the second one, which goes back to what I was saying earlier. if every other department has that same mandate, now that CISO has to show up and help them be risk informed, help lay down the guardrails so we have the security of that AI. So like these CISOs really have this AI for the security team mandate, and they're at the same time trying to secure the AI that's coming into the enterprise, whether that's at the IT level because you have employees who are using web-based LLMs and they're putting data into systems they shouldn't, or companies who are building products and integrating AI into the software that they have. And so you have these CISOs trying to say, how do I ensure the AI workloads are protected? How do I ensure the CI/CD pipelines and all the way back to the developer console is AI aware, and so forth. So they've got this dual mandate of both AI for security and then of course securing this AI.
So the question then becomes how CISOs can effectively message that up to the board. You mentioned like threat mapping or ASM, attack surface mapping. And I don't think we've had our Wall Street Journal moment yet, but there's enough technical research that I think we've both seen, and there's certainly enough in the tech press about how threat actors are leveraging AI, whether it's an LLM or something a little more tailored, to do what they do, which is they're developing innovative new attack techniques. They're developing new strategies. They're using AI to do basically their day job, especially if you're working at a nation state. You know, that's what you do. It's you're going and you're breaking into other people's stuff because you are a government employee and that's your job. What is the thing that CISOs should be thinking about when messaging this up level? And I'm thinking especially when trying to present a fairly esoteric risk, like let's say you say you're worried about North Korea or China or Russia or Iran, one of the other pariah nations. And you're saying, well, they're developing this scary new AI technology that's going to do these bad things. Ergo, we need to get more into risk, or we need more budget, or we need more staff, or we need to change the corporate culture at the board level. I'm thinking of the SEC's efforts to get board level education on cybersecurity in 2023 and how that turned out, which didn't really. How should CISOs be messaging these fairly technical threats in the absence of a mainstream Wall Street Journal level event?
Sure. Well, there's a few examples you touched on a few good points there. So one of the things I can talk about are a few examples that may not be the Wall Street level yet, but they're emerging and indicating of where we're going. So these would be just headline items of things that we should be paying attention to. So we can talk there. And then we should also talk about where is the threat actor using AI today? And let's start getting the spooky stuff. Let's forecast in 18 months, right? No one knows the future, but we can make some logical guesses there. So just on what is the risk that organizations have today that they may be unaware that they're carrying. So some of the things that we've seen, Cloudflare's put out a report that said there was a recent vulnerability in TeamCity. TeamCity is a technology that is used for CI/CD pipelines and building F4. Like all software, it has vulnerabilities. I'm not picking on TeamCity. But the notable thing here was there was a proof of concept on how to make an exploit happen. And that exploit, that proof of concept exploit was put on GitHub. And then within 22 minutes, Cloudflare starting to see its customers getting attacked by this. So what that tells us is the threat actors can go from proof of concept, weaponization, and delivery of and payloads in 22 minutes. What we're also seeing is there's other research coming out where threat actors are looking at the software, especially open source software. They'll see a patch come out. They'll look at the source code. They'll look at the patch. The LLMs help them figure out what is the way to exploit this vulnerability, because you now have the issue and the fix. So they're like, what's the bit in the middle? The LLMs say, okay, here is the exploit. And then they're weaponizing it. So Google's put out some research which shows that they used to take a threat actor maybe 30 days to go from that, and now we're seeing it down to 4. And what's kind of, but that's interesting to go from 30 days to 4 days. But what you compare that to how long it takes the enterprise to get a patch out the door, it's 30, 60, 90 days, right? And so that gives the threat actor, it makes an asymmetrical warfare. So we have 60 days to get a patch out the door to fix the vulnerability. They're exploiting it in 4 days. That's a problem that we're going to have to go solve. So we can see the threat actors starting to go down there. So I think the role of the CISO is not to deliver to their management team and ultimately their boards or their audit committees, headline clippings of things, but it's way to kind of ground this in facts and ground this in education and then go from there. So for instance, you might say, we know that threat actors are moving faster and they're leveraging this technology. So instead of playing whack-a-mole, why don't we spend our time and energies having a defensive posture, right? Assume breach. So let's get the runtime protections in place. Let's get the defensive capabilities in place, knowing that the threat actors are moving faster. So I'm a big advocate of just taking a barbell approach, which is one end, you start with, we're going to put in defensive, responsive technologies. We're going to be in a space that when we know that person drops that payload, we're ready for them, that threat actor. And on the other side, I want to have a really good understanding of my attack surface. I want to have a really good understanding of my inventory around systems that are out there so that we know what is vulnerable. Now, when you have an idea of what your attack surface looks like, and you have an idea of what your capabilities are, you're in a place to have a much more informed conversation. And then the CISO and the management team can talk about where do we invest time, energy, and attention, that's the resource that we're so lacking these days, to say, how do we build resiliency over time? And then we can stack those up over time. So this is a way of starting to get ahead of it. And in a way you're describing of like, how do we bring that education? How do we bring the, how do we help translate the headline into a strategy? And that's one that I advocate for. Be really barbelled, like get really good defensive technology, have really good insight into your risks on the posture side, and then build resiliency over time. You also mentioned, also just want to continue that thought on just the threat actors and their use of AI.
Yeah, no, I had a follow-on question on that, but I want to poke at the middle there. So you've got a barbell, and it's very technical on both ends.
Yeah.
Something that I've seen work fairly well or fairly poorly at organizations is where they don't have any documentation that says that this is how they decided they'd handle stuff. Good example here is that if you assume breach, you assume that you're going to be breached. You have to assume what is the plaintiff's attorney and counsel going to find under discovery that might not look so favorable. And I think we're still at a point of market forgiveness for organizations that are breached, that remain resilient through technical controls, but only if everybody at the board and management level has said, yeah, we agreed to take an example. You said patches, an organization has a 60-day patch policy, a threat actor is able to bin out a 0-day in 4 days based on a POC. Well, that's a 56-day difference. Seems like a problem. What I've seen, though, is that organizations where they can stand up and say, look, we did a threat assessment, we did a risk assessment, everybody on the board agrees, everybody in the management agrees, 60 days was appropriate. If you have a bad day, if a breach occurs, I still think it's possible to get some forgiveness because you were acting consistently. Where it gets problematic, I think, is where organizations don't have that written down. And plaintiff's counsel goes, well, how were you patching? And they're like, you know, when we get around to it, we've
commercially reasonable
we do at some point, you know, and I think that's where we've seen a lot of that heartache come up at an organizational level. Does that sound fair that we need to have a robust internal compliance and documentation of such to prevent even when a deleterious effect happens?
So yes, if we're assuming breach, then we have to assume that we're going to get all the side effects left of that. And so you're right. The plaintiff's lawyer showing up is definitely something I often joke sometimes. It's like your two threat actors that you need to be mindful of are your auditor and the plaintiff's lawyer. It's like we should be adding them to the taxonomy. But you're right, because they are going to show up and we should expect that. And that's not a knock on them. That's just how our system works. So okay, now if you are preparing for the plaintiff's lawyer on the other side, there is something I would say, though, about market forgiveness. Okay, so first of all, you're right. We should be preparing for the plaintiff's lawyers, but I would say we need to go a little further beyond that. So plaintiff's lawyers, when you're looking at it from a legal perspective, they're going to say, what is the evidence available? What is the preponderance of evidence available at the time? And they're going to look at that. That's going to come into account. Your customers and your regulators will not care as much about that.
It's true.
So it's like you can prepare and have all the documentation in the world. You can have all the right handshakes and you can have all the right risk matrices like ticked and tied. And that's a really good thing to happen. But when that bad day happens and it becomes a meaningful event, not for your company, but for your customers, your partners, and your regulators, how you respond to that matters so much. So we've seen a few examples done really well, and we see lots of examples done poorly. But the people who do this well and come out the side like relatively like unscathed are security or so our management teams with a security leader where they're willing to be transparent about what has happened. They stay fact oriented around it. They don't get into the what nows. They're just like, here's where we are, here's what we're doing. And then when they get to the end of their event and they feel like it's been contained and remediated, they do the hard thing, which is they come back out with two more things. And they say, here's root cause analysis. And they kind of oversharing, if you will. There's not a requirement by a law that you have to give that, but there is trust that can be re-earned with your customers when you are being transparent in that way. So those root cause analysis documents go a long way to ensuring you don't have customer churn later on. So I think this is a really important thing to remember, that how you respond to a threat, to an adversarial event is as important as being prepared on paperwork and having all the right processes in place. Because we know the plaintiff's lawyers will show up. Okay. So we have to think beyond that, though. It's like, are we ready for that? But then are we also ready to earn back the trust of our customers? And are we ready for the follow-up questions we're going to get from our regulators after the fact?
All right. Now I want to go back to the idea of threat actors. And something that I've seen over the course of the past few decades is that risk management used to be we do it every 5 years. Then it became, we do it every year. And then some organizations are doing it every quarter to do risk management, risk assessment, risk surveys, and so on. Thinking of the rate of adoption by adversarial actors of various technologies, and clearly they're getting faster. Are we outstripping current risk management processes that say we should look at our risks every duration? And I'm thinking like software supply chain. You said that there were open source packages that are being obviously compromised right now, right? If you've got open source in your stack, it might be a good time to have a look-see at that. Are we outpacing how fast humans can work to come to concurrence on how effectively an enterprise should be managing their business risk portfolio?
Interesting. Yes, you've got a couple of good points there. So maybe we ground it in the use of AI by threat actors, what we're seeing, and then we can come back to the risk management and how we should be navigating this in kind of this new world or this AI transformation that we're in. So when I look at when I simplify the data that's coming out, I would see there are kind of three broad swaths or three categories. So you have threat actors who are using AI just like we are to get more efficiency, right? They're a business. They want to have lower costs and higher impact, just like every other enterprise. And it's a really robust marketplace, even with customer support for ransomware. Like it's mind-boggling. So so I'm not surprised to hear that and see that in the data. What we see there is we're getting more phishing. We're getting more of the same. The things that have worked for the past 10 years, they're using AI to get better at it. They're using AI to go a little faster at it. In the same way that we've been writing emails, but we might use that LLM to help us write our better email faster. They're doing the same thing with phishing. They're doing the same thing with credential harvesting websites, so on and so forth. So that's kind of tier one, more of the same. The second thing is, as enterprises are looking to build out this new technology to support this AI ecosystem, we have brand new technologies with new capabilities, and with that we have new threats. So take a look at this. You might have like a chat bot that's internet facing, and then it's going to reach back into a database and be able to answer the customer queries. On the headline, that's a great idea. But when you're using like the MCP or you're using these other protocols where you have an LLM talking to something in the back end, there are many examples of where this new infrastructure now has new risks. So you have injection attacks where threat actors are putting in, it gets really fun really fast. And by that I mean it's really terrible. Like they'll put in the queries, but the LLMs, the way they're architected, don't know the difference between what is a user query and what is a system instruction. So they execute all of it. And our LLMs are running in whatever privileged state that they are in. And that leads you to having these injection attacks. And then the other one is going like prompt injection. As I mentioned, prompt injection, you said that and then we have other things like LLM jacking and such. So this is where like the OWASP frameworks can really help understand what are those risks, what are those technical threats that are showing up for this net new infrastructure, right? So you have threat actors that are using AI to go faster, do more of the same. You have threat actors who are now weaponizing and getting ready to attack this new infrastructure that's being built out. And then there's this third piece. I haven't seen this yet, but we kind of all know it's coming, and that's the agentic piece of this. When you have a good enough set of scaffolding and enough context, the threat actor can focus and say, when they will spend its time on objectives and outcomes, and then let the LLMs, plural, decide what are the tools, techniques, and procedures they want to take to achieve that outcome. So my kind of rallying cry to the industry is, if we're going to we know the threat actors are moving to the agentic outcomes based threats, attacks, we need to, as defenders, keep par. And we should have platform technologies that give the small cybersecurity teams the ability to focus on outcomes and then let the systems of technologies work with us. So defenders have an agentic platform to work with as well. So they're what we're looking at with a threat actor coming through. Now, there's another part of this, like how do you manage all of this risk? Because, when you have these new threats coming in the environment, like how do you manage it? And a key part of management is around the communication of that. I don't think we're there yet today, but I see a world shortly with everything moving faster and these systems are compounding on each other. The idea of an annual SOC 2 report or an annual PCI attestation or every 3 years getting CMMC certified or something like that, that's just not going to work anymore.
Yeah, and the DoD with their risk management has already come out and said like the traditional NIST RMF is functionally dead. Because it doesn't work because it's too slow.
Exactly. It doesn't go fast enough. So I see a world where we're going to move into continuous assurance. Mm-hmm. We're going to be in a place where we're going to say to a customer, here's our trust portal. Here's our outward facing thing that you're authorized to see under NDA. Oh, and by the way, we promise that these controls are in place and we'll be evidencing this and displaying it to you at some interval, daily, hourly, continuously, and being able to do that. So I see a world where we're going there because if you are a critical supplier in somebody else's business and you're saying, we're going to build this software for you, they're going to say it's not good enough that someone checks that the doors are locked once a year. Right. We need to know that what you're saying on paper is technically validated continuously. So that's going to be part of the story of how we do risk management and also how we communicate it out. And I think that's just kind of a natural given considering the speed, the complexity and scale that we're getting with, that we're seeing from the threat actor side.
Yeah. And so then as we think about what advice we could give to CISOs when they're starting to communicate internally, because you talked a little bit about externally, like we could have continuous validation, continuous assurance. We could put that in a trust portal. We could have evidence that our controls are actually being operated and share that under NDA instead of just the annual SOC 2 attestation or the ISO 27001 attestation. Having those documents be static, you're talking about a much more dynamic model. None of that's free. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine that's going to be some AI vendor is going to be like, yeah, we're just going to do this all magically and it'll be free. So how should CISOs be messaging this AI-informed risk assurance and risk tolerance inside of their organizations? Because to have that future, and I like the idea, we have to build parts of it. So how do we coach our organizations to move that way?
So at the end of the day, we have to keep our eye on the prize. Like, why are we doing this and what are we doing it for? And so if we are someone who says, we're a chief security officer and we're saying, hey, we can help the business grow by landing these customers because these customers are asking for this, the continuous assurance, that's going to make a lot of sense. And so you can have a conversation around the value of what you can attract, the accounts you can get will help offset that cost. That can happen. And in some organizations does. But what I find is that it's very hard for most organizations to connect those two dots, draw a straight line between those two dots. So often it comes back to like, what's the type of company we want to be? What is the type of enterprise we want to be? In a world where trust is so quickly being eroded, do we want to be the platform? Do we want to be the enterprise that our customers, our partners trust us to be there? And so now the CISO can show up and say, hey, we have a cultural rallying cry that this is where we're going. Let me help you get there and I can do that. So there's going to be kind of like these soft and hard components to this. The soft one being like, here's our cultural values. This is where we are. We want to show up there. And then there's going to be the more data driven, which is like, hey, there are more accounts over here. The simple example I would offer is that there's a lot of accounts that were, if you're a enterprise trying to sell into the government, FedRAMP is on your radar, right? Because that's a requirement. That is a bar that whole swath of buying power has said you will achieve. Otherwise, we can't use your technology. There will always be a version of that when you're trying to get into a market, which depends on what that market is. So as CISOs, we get to show up and say, here's how we can help the business go in that way. But again, I would just anchor this to, you can't lose the big picture, like achieving a compliance standard. It's meant to be in service of reducing risk, or said differently, operating inside your risk tolerance. Achieving a certification for the sake of achieving a certification is a waste of money. or at least that's my perspective.
Yeah, that's a very fair perspective too. And before we start to wrap up, how could people keep in touch with you and know what interesting things you're working on these days, Conor? Are you on social media at all?
I appreciate that. Yes. So I'm on LinkedIn. It's a lot of things going on there. I also put out a lot of research and articles on the Sysdig website. So in Sysdig, we're a cloud security platform. We really spend a lot of our time trying to help customers in the cloud security and AI security space. So for the enterprises who have something meaningful, like deploying their LLMs inside their cloud environment, that's something that we get to help them with. And I think it's a privilege that I get to spend my time and my days with the chief security officers of these organizations, helping them think through that dual mandate. How do we bring AI and get that leverage for the security teams? And then how do they show up as a security office and really help the rest of the businesses protect the investment that's being made?
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Conor. And I want to thank you for being on the show. And if you're watching this at home and you think, that was a really good interview and I know somebody who should be on the show, or alternatively, if you're that person who should be on the show, just please DM me, reach out via email, let me know. We're always looking for new guests for Infosec Pros. Again, Conor, it's been so much fun talking to you today at Black Hat 2025.
Thank you again.